Hello again, fellow YouTubers. Today I want to talk about power supplies, also referred to acronym-wise as PSUs. What I have on the table here are 3 sample power supplies. They're all brand new, they have not been used, and they're currently designated in my future bills. This first one is cheap power supply. Oh, by the way, what do you think of my new t-shirt? I bought this at Micro Center the other day and I thought it might be interesting to show you guys. This first one, as I said, is a cheap power supply. I think it cost in total $25. It's a 550 watt power supply, but as you'll see when I open it up, it's not very elaborate and has some problems in terms of trying to use it in a real functioning everyday computer system. This one is intended for my test bench when I create that. This one is a Corsair power supply. Semi-Modular, which I'll explain what that means in a minute, 450 watts, and it will be the power supply that's going to go into my new server. And then this one, which I just recently got, is a Fully-Modular 850 watt power supply that is intended for my future supercomputer, as I've mentioned in previous videos. So this power supply, you'll notice something distinctive about it, brand new. There's a power cable that they all come with. Okay, put that aside. And the actual power supply itself. I don't believe I've actually opened this one up yet. Everything has instructions, so does this one. I always read the instructions before I actually use it. But here's the power supply itself. It actually has fairly attractive cables to them. You will see, and the term that's used by this by other YouTube PC builders is one that is mustard and ketchup. And the reason that they call it that is because the wires, the colors of the wires show. So the red, the ketchup, you have yellow, which is normally the 12 volt, and you have the orange, which I believe is the -5. We can look them up later. But as you can see, all the cables, this is a non-modular power supply. All the cables in this power supply are connected to the power supply, and you have to put away in the side of the case any cables that are not being connected to something, whether it's the motherboard, standard motherboard connectors here, the 20 plus the 4, and then a selection of various other cables depending on the peripherals you're trying to connect to, or video cards. This one already has the Molex connectors on it, so if you happen to have something that requires a Molex, then you would utilize that. This one is sharing it with a standard SATA power connector. It's just the end connector on it. Anything then, of course, that you don't use, you'll probably want to tie wrap out of the way, make it look a little better, and not impede any of the airflow. This one also has a smaller one. You don't see that too often. It's not used very frequently, but this connector here is a connector for a 3.5-inch drive. Traditionally there were things like floppy drives, which you won't find in modern computers anymore, but this design obviously is somewhat dated, so it includes it. Now let's look at the semi-modular, the one that I'm going to use for my server. Again, instructions, I always look through them. This one has some tie wraps and some other stuff that comes with it, screws. The general rule of thumb is you should use the screws because they're probably meant for the particular power supply in question. They're not too long, they're not too short, and they won't go into critical areas of the power supply if they were included with it. Now this one is what we call a semi-modular. Now the actual power connector obviously is the same. As a matter of fact, I think it'll work on the other one as well. Yeah, it would. One thing to note with the other one, though, that I didn't make point of, there is no power switch on this. So you have to be aware that you'll have to pull the plug out of the back of this in order to fully turn off the power supply. So open this one up, and this one has a power switch. Double checked, but it does. Most of the modern ones do that have any value to them at all. The difference being is this only has what's called semi-modular. It has the two cables connected to it that would connect to the motherboard. So you have the motherboard 20 plus 4, plus you have the additional power connector for the CPU, up to 8 pins on this particular one, which is quite, the most common motherboard will be supported by that, although some may have issue with it and may require 2 of these, or maybe 2 6s. So we'll see that as we get into it. What you see here are the actual connectors where you would connect other peripheral cables. And they've provided those cables in a little package here with the power supply. And in this package we have the other cables. Now these are nice flat ribbon cables, which dress a little bit nicer in modern cases. So this particular one is for video graphics cards. So on the one end you see the connector that says type 4, and that type 4 replies to the type 4 that you see back here on the connectors. Although you really can't make a mistake because the number of pins, there's only one place where you can put that one that has 8 pins to it. The other end of it would connect to up to 2 video cards. There's 2 of these, 6 that can be expanded to 8 by the additional 2 pins that are here. Okay. And then this is a cable that supports Molex, and it supports the 3.5-inch floppy as well. And you would plug this one in on the end here that says type 4 as well. You make sure that you plug it into the right connector on the back of the power supply. It's only 6 pins, so there's only 3 places that it could possibly go. And then finally you have one that is the SATA power cables. So this particular one supports 1, 2, 3, 4 SATA power connectors on it, which is going to be something now I have to be aware of. I'm going to have more than 4 SATA drives in my server, as you will see. So I'll either have to buy another one of these, or I have to put adapters on one of the other cables. So we'll see how that goes. But that's something that's good to know, that I only have the one cable in it. I'm not going to be using the one that obviously has the Molex, if at all possible. So I'm going to get another one of these, and it'll plug into the same connector that the Molex one would plug into. So I should have enough connectors on the power supply to support what I need. I just don't have enough cables that came with this in order to do that. Now finally, the one I'm going to talk about is the biggie. This is meant for my supercomputer at some point when I get all the parts together and the money to buy those parts. Then this particular power supply will be that power supply that will be in that computer. Now what I have in my current computer, my current workstation that I use for doing things like video editing and other general purpose computing, that has a Corsair, but a Corsair 650, and it's fully modular. It was not needed for that one, but it was what was on sale at the time, so I got it. And that's how I tend to do a lot of things when it comes to buying computer parts. I look for the good deals, and if there's a good deal out there, I will take advantage of it, especially when it gets around Black Friday time and Cyber Monday. A lot of good deals happen then. We have a nice little manual. We have the power supply, of course, the power connector. This one is a bit heftier power connector than one of the other ones. You can actually see the difference in the gauge of the wires. noticeably different. It's going to draw more power from the power line, so it needs that. The power supply itself, and it's about the same size pretty much as the other one. A little bit longer, maybe about 1/4 of an inch longer, maybe about 1/8 of an inch wider, but pretty much the same. It'll fit in a standard case. So we got the EVGA. Of course, this one has the actual power switch on it. This one also has an eco switch on it as well to change the economy of the power supply. I'll have to look that up in the instructions and find out exactly how that applies. But it has an eco little toggle switch, and it has a regular power switch. Always make sure you turn them off when you put them back. So all of these are going to go, the two that anyway that have actual power switches will be in the off position. Now this one has no cables pre-attached. All the cables will be added, and they provide them in this big jumble of cables. Many more than the other one. So this one here, the standard Molex. That'll plug into the standard Type 4 connector. Actually, what they do here, this is a SATA cable. It provides power for 3 SATAs. Good. This one here provides power for 3 more SATAs. So 6 total. That's what I need for my server. This one here says actually on it, CPU. So this is the one for the CPU to provide the additional 12 volts that's needed by most modern CPUs. We got a little adapter here, which is, it goes Molex to the smaller connector for a 3.5 inch drive, like the floppies. Okay, probably never used that. What do I got here? It's like an expansion. I can take one of the connectors that's here and double it up. So I take one of the 8-pin connectors, just in case I guess I could run short. There's 2 there. If I need another one, actually there's 4 of them there. If I need another one, this one will split it for me. So that's a pretty good thing to have, just in case I need it. Of course, here's the biggie. This is the actual motherboard power connector. Okay, so this is what plugs in. It tells you where everything goes. This one goes into the actual power supply. It has MB on it. That's what's written in the back here, MB on the big connector. And then the other end says MB for the whole connector for the power supply. What do we got here? Yet another SATA connector, 3x. Oh, we've got to put a lot of drives in with this. This one here, video card power. You can always tell when you see this 4 and then 2. So this looks like it supports up to 2 video cards on one cable. This one is another video card. So we're talking actually 2 more. So this one can support 4 video cards. Okay. And then this one here looks like, well, definitely that's a video card. It must be a special connector because that's another double. We're not going to have 6. I wonder if they gave me extra. But in any case, I'll be looking through the instructions, make sure all the parts are there. That's one of the reasons I always look at the instructions as well, to make sure I'm not being shorted anything. Things you should have handy for dealing with power supplies. The most important thing is one of these, a power meter. And when you plug it in to your utility power, you can then see what the wattage is that's being used. You can see what the current is. It has a separate button for each one of them. So what I like to do is when I've put together a new system or modified an existing one, added or subtracted something, I like to see how much actual current it's drawing. Now this is not a very expensive unit, so it's not going to record for me. They do sell those that'll actually record it, and we can upload it to the computer and analyze it. If I was doing a commercial shop, I would consider doing that. But this is good enough for my purpose, and you'll see as you start using things and you start running certain programs, for example, if you run the Heaven benchmark on your video card, you'll suddenly see this drawing almost twice as much power. The video card's GPU is a heavy draw, draws about the same amount of power as your CPU in most cases. So that's one of the most important things to consider. The other thing is a little tester here. Now, a lot of questions about this. This won't tell you whether the thing is intermittent or is subject to failure under load. What it will tell you is whether it's dead or not. So you would plug it into the connector, and you pick the connectors. It's got several to choose from. You can connect into it the 6-pin connectors, the 8-pin connectors, mostly with 12 volt, or the entire CPU connector can connect up to that. They only go one way, so just be careful when you do it that you orient it properly and you get it inside the This one has 2 arrows on it, so the two this is telling you in this power supply that those two should go together. So we can actually plug this in and test it out. One thing that you can do when you want to test, especially some of these other connectors, when you want to make sure that they are energized properly and the power supply is not energized, then you need one of these jumper plugs. Now, some of the higher end power supplies come with these. The ones I have here did not. I purchased this from Amazon for like $3. And if you connect this one up, it has a particular wire jumpered, and that wire will tell the power supply to kick on. Oops, wrong thing. It doesn't go into the tester. This is what would go into the actual power supply connector here. So you'd plug this in here and make sure then, in this case, for this one, you have it plugged in. It will energize, guaranteed, because that is the jumper on the power supply that is needed. Now you could make one of these on your own. No big deal to put a jumper in a connector, but I bet you if you try to buy the connector, it probably costs twice as much as what you can get it pre-built for. Believe me, that's the way those things tend to work. So I would suggest you go ahead and have these available to you if you're going to do any significant number of bills, so that you can have something to diagnose and help troubleshoot problems that might occur. Also, another advantage of this one is if you have some of the water cooling options in particular, you want the pump to start pumping, but you don't necessarily want the computer to turn on. So if you plug this into the power supply rather than to your motherboard going into the power supply, then it will supply the 12 volts needed on one of the SATA connectors that can power your pump for your water cooler. So while you're filling it up, and also you can use the same thing to power your LED setup if you want to just test that out separately from having the motherboard come up. That's what I highly suggest you do, and that's where having something like this comes in very handy in order to get that power supply to provide the power that you need. Now let me show you some stuff online here. What I have on the screen right now is the only real reason that you would want a fully modular power supply. Now there's multiple reasons to have the semi-modular. For example, I decided that the semi-modular was the best one to use for my server, since I have very tight spaces in that little Cooler Master Elite 130. Therefore, I only want to use the cables that I have to use. Obviously, it's going to have the power supply. It's going to have the motherboard connectors coming out anyway. So getting a semi-modular where those are automatically provided works out for that. And then all of the other peripheral cables, I'll only plug in the ones that I absolutely need. And thereby save room. I won't have to hide cables in the case. Why would you go for the fully modular? Custom cables that you can buy for any power supply. Most of them, the power supply cables are the same from one power supply maker to the next. Very few are different. So usually if you buy one, it covers you on most modern ones. This site here shows how you can buy custom cables. And you can actually get very custom and pick the colors of the individual things that you want to see. And you can also pick the lengths. So it's not just the colors of the cables, but once you have your case and you have it measured out in terms of the distance between the power supply and each of the computer components that you have to connect power to, you can define the actual lengths of those cables where each connector will appear. So there's a lot of choices on this particular website, but there are others. I just wanted to show you one of them, and the only real reason to buy a fully modular power supply. How do you know what size power supply do you need? As you saw right there, I had a 550, I had a 450, I had an 850. In this computer here, I have a 650. Well, how do you make that determination of which power level you need? Well, there's many programs. This is one that I use, Extreme Outer Vision, that will actually help you configure it. You plug into this what your computer will have in it. How many CPUs you have, because you're going to have more than one in some systems. As you can see, it automatically knows what the megahertz and the voltage is running at. What do you want the CPU utilization to be on that power supply? You're going to be using this computer 90%? Or are you going to be using it less? The CPU part of it, that is. It depends on what your usage is going to be. Gamers will have more use versus some others. I do my rendering of my videos here, so I'm going to have a high use on the CPU. Memory. How many memory DIMMs do you have, and what type are there? Again, you get a whole choice of ones to choose from. DDR4, 3, 2, and then different sizes of each. Then your video cards. And this particular one handles up to 2 video cards. But then you pick everything that you have in here. I mean, I have a Blu-ray drive installed, so I put that in there as an optical drive. I have a PCI Express card. It's not a TV tuner, it's a video capture card, but this is close enough because it didn't give a lot of choices here. I do have a fan controller. I do have 3 140 millimeter fans. I have 3 120. I don't have any liquid cooling on this one. I don't have a cooling pump. Sometimes you have more than one. And here it says that my load wattage is 339. Did I hit calculate? Let me hit calculate just to make sure. Actually, it went up to 511. They're recommending that if I have a UPS, it's an 1100 VA. I actually have a 1350 VA, which is good. My recommended PSU, they recommend 561. I have a 650, so I'm good. Let's talk about the 80 plus efficiency rating. I put together a few slides here on some research that I did. The first thing is, and this is an accumulation of results from multiple sources, the actual vendors themselves in a couple of cases, and also some general information. And what you have here is this concept of the 80 plus, which right now that's sort of the standard. You don't want to get a power supply that's not 80 plus rated for any computer that's doing something important. So for example, that one that I had, the cheap one, that's not an 80 plus at all. So it doesn't fall within this. So even though it has a 500 watt rating, it is not very efficient. But I'm not going to be running a computer on my test bench for long periods of time. However, every other computer, I have an 80 plus one put in, at least since this rating system has been around. So this shows all the different ratings you can have. You have the 80 plus, you have the 80 plus bronze, you have the 80 plus silver, the 80 plus gold, platinum, and titanium. And these charts show what the efficiency rating is, depending, this is an important factor here, depending on what the load that's being drawn from that power supply. It's something a lot of people probably don't think about, but the load is important. Let me show you how this looks graphically so you get a better picture of it. So as you can see here, I have them all plotted. That same data that was on that table plotted here. But the very top one is the titanium, the very bottom one is just the 80 plus. It looks like a pretty rounded curve. If you look at it carefully though, it peaks. It peaks at a particular load value, and that load value happens to be 50%. Now 50% just so happens that that's the same level that applies to all sorts of electronic equipment. And sure enough, right down the line, every one of these types of 80 plus power supplies peak out in terms of their efficiency when you're drawing 50% of their available load value. Another interesting point here, if you look carefully at this chart, is if you have something either underpowered or overpowered, then you could actually be hurting your overall efficiency. For example, if you take a look at the 90% rating, you have the 80 plus gold can actually outperform the efficiency of either platinum or the titanium, because they would not be running at 50% load to get 90%. So just keep that in mind, that you should try to get yourself a power supply that fits at the 50% rating level. And that previous web page I showed you, if you read the instructions, that is one of the things they do describe as well, that it's really the 50%. And if you hook up that little watt meter that I showed you a few minutes ago, you will see that most computers out there that are properly sized for their power supply are running at about 50% of the rating. I really hope you got something out of today's little lecture on power supply units, and that in the future you'll have a better understanding of where all of these numbers fit in. This channel survives and allows me to continue to put up new videos going forward only as long as I can get people to watch it, and more importantly right now, to get them to subscribe to it. If you choose to subscribe, it is not going to cost you one dime. You just have to have email. If you do Gmail, it's the easiest one to use, and you log in with that account. As a matter of fact, if you happen to have your Gmail window open at the time when you then open up a window into YouTube, it automatically will log in for you once you click the log on button in the upper right hand corner. It won't bother you either unless you choose to answer the question that pops up, usually on mobile devices only, that says, do you want to be notified of any changes to the channel? If you don't agree to that, that's fine. You'll still be subscribed. The same thing with the actual web-based version of it. It will not notify you unless you click the little bell next to the subscribe button. You'll only receive emails, by the way, if you happen to have your own channel. Otherwise, it will not email you about any changes in my channel. So please, do me a favor, keep this channel growing, and subscribe today. Thank you.